Welcome to English Reading for Learning.
Edward the Frog. I'm going to find a girl to break the spell, declared Edward the Frog one bright sunny morning. The other frogs stared at him in utter confusion. What spell? Asked Tad. The one that turned me from a handsome human prince into a small green frog, answered Edward. Don't be silly, said Jumper. We've known you since you were a tadpole. You were never a human being, prince or otherwise. Whoever enchanted me probably made all of you forget that I was ever human, insisted Edward. That's ridiculous, said Spotty. Face it, Edward, you're a frog. That's all you've ever been, and that's all you'll ever be. But what about my name? Said Edward. All the rest of you have froggy names. I have a human name. Have you ever known any other frog named Edward? It sounds quite princely, don't you think? Somewhere there's a girl who will break this cruel spell by kissing me. Then we'll fall in love and be married and live happily ever after. You've been listening to too many fairy tales, declared Tad. Wait and see, said Edward. When I'm a prince again, I'll take you all to my castle and build you a spectacular jeweled pond. And with that, Edward hopped off down the lane that ran alongside the stream. Soon he came to a girl sitting under a tree. Eek! She shrieked. Go away, you nasty old frog! She ran down the road, screaming at the top of her lungs. How rude! Exclaimed Edward indignantly. I'm not nasty. I'm not old, and I'm only temporarily a frog. He hopped farther down the lane. He came to another girl who was picking flowers. Hello, little frog, she said pleasantly. How do you do, he said politely, relieved that she hadn't screamed or run away in fright. Would you please help me with a rather unusual problem? I've never had a conversation with a frog before, she said, smiling at him. Actually, he said, I only look like a frog. I'm really an enchanted prince, and if you kiss me, the spell will be broken. Kiss you, she asked, giggling. To turn you into a prince? Edward tried to stand up tall and straight, which is not easy for a frog to do. Yes, he answered. After you break the spell, we'll fall in love and be married and live happily ever after. Her eyes twinkled. I'm not ready to fall in love with anyone yet, but as one friend to another, I'll kiss you and see if you're transformed. This was fine with Edward. He was sure that once she saw him in his handsome princely form, she wouldn't be able to help falling in love with him. The girl picked up Edward and held him in front of her face. He closed his eyes and held his breath. She lightly kissed the top of his head. Edward kept his eyes closed and waited. Nothing happened. He opened one eye. She was still holding him in front of her face. He opened the other eye. He was still a small green frog. It was an interesting experiment, she said, gently putting him down on the ground. Glad to have met you. He mumbled, Thank you, and hopped to the edge of the stream. He plopped down dejectedly, letting the water trickle across his toes. How disappointing. How humiliating. The other frogs had been right. He was only a small green frog. What's the matter? Asked a very small, high-pitched voice. A tiny green worm was watching him from a nearby leaf. I've just suffered a major disappointment, he told her. I'm sorry to hear that, she said. When he didn't answer, she went on. My name is Emily. I've never known anyone who suffered a major disappointment. What happened to you? Edward was embarrassed to admit how foolish he had been. I thought I was something I'm not, he answered vaguely. My name is Edward, he added, trying to change the subject. Aren't you happy to be a frog? She persisted. I think it would be wonderful to be a frog. I've always admired frogs. I wish I could hop. She looked sadly at her little body. Edward straightened up a bit. I suppose it is rather special to be able to hop. If I were a frog, I would be so happy, murmured Emily. She looked so forlorn that Edward wanted to comfort her. He leaned over and gave her a tiny frog kiss. Poof! Pop! Boom! There was a bright flash of light. Edward fell over backward. There was a ringing in his ears, and for a moment he couldn't see. When he opened his eyes, he saw that Emily was gone. In her place sat a frog with a dazed expression. "Where did Emily go?" Edward asked the frog. I'm Emily," she said, looking at her froggy self. "Now I remember everything. Once upon a time, I was a frog. Then one day, a mean old wizard caught me splashing in his pond and changed me into a worm. When you kissed me, you broke the spell. You're my hero." She blinked her eyes at him adoringly. Edward was in love. "I'm so glad to be a frog again," she whispered. "I'm glad I'm a frog too," he said shyly. Then together they hopped off down the lane.
Thanks for watching and listening. Please click like and subscribe for new and latest uploads.